This month, we're going to be talking about how your stories can meet readers' expectations and the importance of trying to meet readers' expectations.
My name is Eva Barrows. I am a developmental editor for fiction and nonfiction books. I do story development coaching, and I'm also a publication manager for newsletters.
My name is Lila, and I have LaBine Editorial. I do copy editing for fiction, beta reading for certain fiction genres, and then I proofread screenplays. We're going to be talking about reader expectations, like I said. But first, we wanted to briefly say something about book covers, because a book cover is basically, it's the first thing, that your readers see, and that gives them the expectation of what your story might be like. So it's the first impression that they get of your book. And I am not a cover expert, but I do know a little bit. And then as a reader, I know what I like and don't like. So you just want to make sure that your cover is somewhat on trend with your genre's current trends. So if you write romance, you want to look at other romance books that are, have been written in the last year or so, or, published in the last year or so, and somewhat make your book like that. Of course, you don't want it to be exactly like all the other romance books. You don't want to just blatantly copy things, but just staying a little bit on trend is very helpful. And then your readers know what to expect. They know, okay, so this looks like a romance book. It says it's a romance story. I'm probably going to like this, or I'm probably not going to like this, because it's not for me. So just make sure that the colors you use, the fonts you use, are genre appropriate. And then make sure that the title and the author's name, your name, are easily legible. The colors against the background should make it pop out. You want to be able to read it, even like when it's at a thumbnail size, and then also when it's fully blown up. And then you don't want to mislead. So that's, if you don't make it genre appropriate, then people pick up the book, start reading, thinking it's one thing, and then it turns out to be something completely different. And a lot of people don't like that. Some people do, so that's okay. But I recently read I think it was maybe romantic suspense, but the cover was it looked more like a peaceful, like beach read. And although I liked this story, okay, I was really confused why she chose that cover. So things like that.
And then I was just going to talk a little bit more about what book covers promise readers. And readers are going to go to a certain spot in the bookstore, as you know, or the library, just expecting to find, certain types of books in that area. And then once they're there, they're going to let the book cover, tell them visually what they can expect to find inside, like what Lila was just talking about. And then there's going to be other things, like a synopsis, reader reviews, and then maybe the, potential reader might look through the first couple pages of this book to see, if they're going to be interested in the story. And then these interactions with the book may entice someone to, invest their time and money and start reading the book. And then once the reader is sold on your book, the story inside has to deliver on those early promises made, or they're going to be disappointed, like Lila was saying about what she just experienced.
Okay, so readers expect to be entertained. They expect to be pulled into another reality or world and stay there, not be pulled out. They expect genre beats to be hit with maybe some original twists to make it extra memorable. And they want to have strong feelings about your characters and probably root for the main character in most cases. And then any questions that the readers have or questions that your story raises should be answered by the end. And that's what makes the ending feel satisfying. And when readers' expectations aren't met, they get bored, they get frustrated. Sometimes they want to stop reading and they do, or they keep reading and then they feel burned or just disappointed at the end of the story. And they want to leave bad reviews, or they want to tell others, don't read this book. It's like not at all what I thought. So that's what can happen.
So character change equals entertainment. And so stories are about change. The purpose of a story is to transport readers into the lives of characters who emotionally experience the plot. And that's what happens in the story and are changed by it. So the readers go on a journey with your characters and experience what it would be like to make this evolution without having to live it themselves. If a character remains in the same emotional state that they start in, there really is no story to tell. Readers will stop reading if they sense that the story is not progressing with meaningful change in their characters. So how to infuse stories with change? And just to let you know, a random set of events is not going to interest the reader. It's not going to hold their attention. It's just kind of things, this happened and then that happened. So that's not going to pull this reader into the story. Your protagonist, the story's central character, is going to begin the story in one emotional state and end the story in another. So throughout the story, their emotions and the situations that they come up against are going to rise and fall as they experience the plot. So there's going to be some movement up and down, and the reader's going to go along on this journey with them. And so I'm going to talk about 5 structural elements that you should use to infuse your scene and the story as a whole with change. So the 5 structural elements are the following. And then just to make sure that I let you know that this is for the big story level, you're going to want this to happen structurally throughout the story at an overall view. And then within each scene itself, it needs to go through a similar progression so that each scene and then the story as a whole would have an inciting incident. And this is what happens. So something happens to make your protagonist, the main character, take action, and then it really kicks off the story or kicks off, what's happening in the scene. And then progressive complications are roadblocks or, some sort of resistance to the character getting what they want. And that's, throughout the story itself. And then throughout each scene, there's something that happens that the character has to kind of face. And then crisis is a choice that the character needs to make that's consequential. So they either need to do A or they need to do B. And then each one has their drawbacks and then positive things that the character is trying to obtain. And then each scene and the story as a whole would have a climax. And this is the fallout of after they make that choice, what happens? And then resolution. So how does the scene resolve and flow into the next scene? Or how is the story as a whole wrapping up and resolving?
Your story should pull readers in and keep them there. So in your writing, there's a lot of, if you have unintentional repetition that you're not aware of, which it's hard for writers to see that in their own work because you're reading it over and over. You don't always notice that. So that's when beta readers and editors come in, and then it can be very useful. But anyway, so repetition can be one of the things that pulls your readers out of the story because they notice it and then they start noticing it each time, and then it becomes annoying and they stop, wanting to keep reading. So you can have repetition in your description, using the same words and phrases to describe a setting or a character or an event every time it shows up in the story. So if you're writing, maybe your setting is like a castle And every time it's mentioned, you mention that it's like cold and dark, and or some unique word, and you use that same word over and over again, or that those same adjectives. That can get old. Action beats, a lot of writers have things that their characters do over and over, not just like particular to that character, like because it's that character's personality, but all their characters do it, and they all do it a lot, like raising their eyebrows or shrugging or nodding and smiling. There's a lot of things. You just have to watch out for those. Pet words and phrases. Every writer, every person, even in our speech, we have these pet words and phrases that we use more often than others, and we may not notice it, but other people do. So especially if it's like a unique word, I have here like flabbergasted. If that's just a word you tend to enjoy using, and then maybe your character is flabbergasted like 5 times throughout the manuscript, that doesn't seem like it would be a lot, 5 times, in 200 pages, but it can be because it's such a unique word. And so, I don't know, as a reader, I'm kind of like, oh, the character's flabbergasted again, so you just have to be careful. Sentence structure. So are all your sentences really short? Are they all really long and rambling? Do you always have the same structure, like pulling at the cord, he, or walking around the door, he, that kind of, if it's fine to have those, but if they all are the same way, or if you have like 4 or 5 sentences in a row that start or end the same way, that also gets it's noticeable. And the flow and structure of your writing can affect your reader's experience. So when you're spelling things out for readers, they can figure out for themselves, or over explaining a point that your readers should be able to understand the first time, that can pull a reader out of the story. And then sentences and paragraphs that don't flow, or maybe they're grating to the ear because a word is used often, or instead of using pronouns once in a while, you're always using the character's name. It can get really old. So I'm going to read this kind of extreme example, and you'll see what I mean. Calla was annoying at the meeting today. Calla kept interrupting Mac every time he tried to speak at the meeting. The meeting went on forever because Calla made the meeting so difficult every time she interrupted. Mac had a horrible time, and Calla didn't even take the time to notice that everyone else was not enjoying their time. So you see how I overused Calla's name. I could have used she and her if those are her pronouns. I overused the word meeting, time, and it was all just kind of choppy. It kind of sounded like a 4th grader wrote it, which is, fine. You just have to go back and check for stuff like that, because you will find stuff like that in your manuscript. You just have to go back, and reading aloud helps me to find that a lot when I'm editing. You don't want your readers to have to struggle to get through your book. So that means spelling, punctuation, grammar, all of that needs to be pretty good, or at least, it needs to be good enough that it's not distracting readers. And using unique, or if you have like a different font in different paragraphs, that's very distracting, of course. And then using a lot of exclamation points, or all caps, or a ton of italics also is distracting for readers. So like, I have an example here. What do you mean you don't want to go out with me? You could easily just do the second one instead. If you wanted to add some emphasis, sure, you could italicize me. Or maybe you might use the interrobang with the question mark and the exclamation mark together. But multiple exclamation marks and all the italics, it's just too much. So watch out for that. If you've created a story that's in like modern day society, you still have to be careful, because readers will pick up on little things. So A story Bible you can create a story Bible, which is basically just a document where you keep track of your characters, the story timeline, settings, all the details of your story's world. So if you are writing a fantasy, you might have a whole different system, like for their calendar or time. They might have a different money system, and you just have to be able to keep track of all that vocabulary. A map of your story's world, even if it's set in the real world, that's going to be very helpful. So if your story is set in Cincinnati, Ohio, and you've used two street names that in your story they're perpendicular, but in real life they're parallel, people who read that and know Cincinnati well, that's going to pull them out. They're going to be like, wait a minute, that you couldn't get, be at the corner of Washington and Powell. I don't know. I'm using San Francisco streets. Travel time should be accurate. And then a timeline of your story's events is good because you want to make sure everything feels very real. So your years, seasons, months, the passing of days, all needs to basically make sense. That's where copy editors come in. And then with dialogue, if you've created a whole new world, your dialogue might need extra attention because maybe there's a different rhythm of speaking, or maybe different vocabulary, or the way people speak are going to be different than we speak. So you might need to pay attention and make sure that some of your, modern day or this culture's way of speaking hasn't slipped in. Does it feel like your characters are info dumping? So if you have created a whole new world, again, like for a fantasy or sci-fi, and you want the reader to get a certain piece of information, and you have your character say it in dialogue when it doesn't sound like the character would naturally say that to their friend who probably already knows that information, that can be info dumping in dialogue. So you got to be careful about that. And then if there are different cultures or groups within the world you've created, does each character speak as, if they belong to that culture or this group, do they speak that way and not like the other? You just have to really be careful with the consistency in dialogue and the ways people speak.
All right. So don't forget genre beats and conventions. So I suggest staying in the genre playground. So that's when a reader picks up a book in the romance section of the bookstore, they're going to expect a certain type of story. And then genre is the type of story being told, and it's created by incorporating certain story elements and milestones that make that story, being told a romance, qualifies as a romance. Genre expectations create a familiar playground for unique characters and settings to interface. So there's plenty of room for authors to surprise readers within the genre framework. And then just to let you know that it's also very helpful to have this structure so that you're not starting from a blank page. You kind of already know, there's certain things that are going to need to be in your story, and you can start thinking about how you're going to develop that and create that. So how to deliver on genre expectations. So first off, you want to be familiar with the type of book that you're going to write. And you would, of course, read other authors and other popular authors in that genre, from maybe from the past, but also from current day, that people that you're going to be on the shelf with. So you can look up what the specific genre beats are that need to be included in your story. And I just kind of think the beats are kind of like baking ingredients. You have to have all of them there to make a yummy cake. So if you're going to start off and you're not too sure about, what needs to be, in your certain story, you can look up the genres, just look them up online. But I also suggest these two resources here. The Anatomy of Genres is a book by John Truby, and he goes over about 13 different genres and tells you exactly, what needs to be in each, in each type of story. And then Story Grid is a book, and it's also a website. And this website here, storygrid.com, is /content hyphen genre. You can, just kind of look up, that you're interested in writing a sci-fi, what needs to go into a sci-fi, and then it has it all there listed for you. And then just to quickly go over, what genre beats might look like. So for a romance, there's 6 scene types that have to be included in the story. So within the story, in the structure, you'll have at some point the lovers need to meet each other. So that's going to happen pretty soon when you first start plotting your story. And then after they meet each other, there's going to be some sort of intimate connection. So this could be their first kiss or time together. And then after that, one of the couples confesses their love to the other. And then at some point towards probably the middle end, the lovers are going to break up. And then through sacrifice, they're going to prove their love to each other. And then they'll reunite at the end. So then you'll find out, are these 2 people meant to be together? Does it work or does it not work? And that's what the ending is going to be. So on top of this, there are other aspects that make a story a romance. And then that's things like secrets that the lovers have, or that they, either have together or they're keeping secrets from each other. And then there's rituals. So together, what kind of rituals do these 2 people share with each other? And so it's just kind of something that goes into a romance story. And then just check out those resources, those books, to find out, what readers expect in the certain genre that you're looking at. And then your readers want to feel invested in your characters. So characters need to want something. Readers expect to spend time with multidimensional characters who instantly grab their attention and are easy to connect with and root for or against. So authors should populate their stories with characters driven by external wants, so something that they want, and internal need. And then that conflicts with what other characters want and need. So the antagonists, the people are wanting other things and other things from this main character. And then these clashing objectives create story momentum and tension, and they make it difficult for your readers to put the book down. So how to build character desires into your story. So like with the building change into your story that I talked about earlier, your character should want and need something at the overall big picture story level, and then also individually at each scene level. So at the full story level, figure out what your overarching goal for your character is. What are they striving to achieve in the end of the story? It's helpful to know what your character's end goal is, so you can create scenes that move toward or away from that goal. And then when you're preparing to write a scene, note what steps your character is going to take to obtain this goal. So within that scene, they're still looking at the big picture, like this big thing that they want. What are they doing within that individual scene to get what they want in the end?
And then your characters, when it's difficult to follow who's who in a story, your readers are very likely to get frustrated. And what makes it difficult? When you have too many characters introduced in the same scene, or you name every single character, even if it's like a very minor part, like a waitress at a restaurant that the main character visits once, they're never going to speak to that waitress again. And then it's not always necessary to give that character a name, because the more character names a reader has to keep track of, the harder it is to follow the story. Characters with unintentionally similar names, I see this a lot when I'm editing, so I just pointed out. So if you have a character named Pat, another one named Rick, another one named Patrick, it just gets, it can get confusing. And then characters that seem to serve no purpose in a story, or sometimes your developmental editor will help you notice when maybe there's two characters that could be merged into one, and that'll just be easier for readers, and it'll still move the plot along just as it would if you had two. And then characters who don't have their own distinct personalities or ways of behaving. So each of your characters it should just be very obvious which character is either speaking or which character would act this way. You just want them to be their own people. And in order to have them feel real like that, you have to be the expert on your characters. So you have to develop their full personality. So I suggest writing about each character before you even, or at some point during the writing of the first draft. And I know I think authors do this anyway, but I learned more about this from my son, who writes like these long, series of stories. And he always has like character pages in a whole separate document with like their backstory, their quirks, their mannerisms, things they like and dislike, things that trigger them, how they react to things that trigger them, and their flaws and their strengths, along with a description of their appearance. So that's going to be really helpful. Even if some of that stuff doesn't even make it into the manuscript, you just knowing that will help as you write, and it'll help make your characters feel even more real. And then make sure your characters act consistently. So that's where that story Bible or that document of all your characters comes in. Because even though, your character is going to change or grow, you still want it to make sense and still seem like that character. It's just that they're changing and growing, but it's not like a completely different person. It doesn't even, you don't want it to be jarring. So beta readers and editors can let you know when they feel a character is acting in a way that doesn't seem to fit their personality. And then that will tell you one of two things. Either it is how your character would act, but maybe you haven't shown that well enough in the story. So you need to adjust some things so that it does seem like, oh no, that is my character's personality. Or it is off character or out of character for your character, and you need to fix it that way and make sure that they're acting in a way that's more like them.
So give your readers a satisfying ending. You don't want to disappoint your readers, right? So wrap up all of the story questions that were asked within the story. So sometimes, like Lila was saying, the authors might not know that they posed a question, so then that's helpful for an editor to look back and be like, well, you brought this up early on. What happened with that? So I find that a lot too when I'm editing. So readers expect to find out what happens next, and then at the end of the story, they want to know the answers. If an author writes a romance, so the genre itself asks the question, do the lovers get together in the end? So that's why it's helpful to have the genre, because it already poses that question for you, and you need to answer it. The main character has their own questions to resolve, like whether they achieve their goal of obtaining their dream career and the guy that they like. So do they obtain their goal in the end? We need to know that.
And we're going to give you some self-editing tips for meeting readers' expectations. helps to regularly step away from your manuscript during the revision process. That way, each time, say if you set it aside for a week or sometimes even a month, you can come back to it with fresh eyes. And then you notice a lot more things that you would not have noticed had you not taken that break. And then every now and then, if you can, read your manuscript from beginning to end in one day and just take notes, but don't do any actual editing. Just take notes. And this will help you focus on the overall story structure and the entertainment level, or if there's anything confusing. And I think that's best done after one of those breaks. So say you didn't look at it for a week or two, and then you did a day where you just sat down, you read it, you took notes. That's it. I think that's extremely helpful. And then, like I said, keep a document for each character that holds absolutely everything you know about them, whether the info is in the story or not. And then that helps you as you write and self-edit. Make sure your character's dialogue matches what you know about them. Are their voices distinct from other characters? Notice patterns in your writing that might become predictable and annoying to your readers, and then kind of give those a little refresh. Read your writing out loud as you edit. I think I suggest this every Ask an Editor session, but it's just the most helpful thing in the world. You'll catch all those grating sentences. You'll catch sentences that aren't flowing. You'll catch repetition. You'll catch dialogue that doesn't seem authentic. It's probably the most helpful thing you can do. And then double check spelling, grammar, and punctuation, and use a copy editor and a proofreader.
And then for the story level, I would say make a list of each scene. So just kind of, you can use a spreadsheet or just a document to write out what the main event is of each scene, and identify, so within that list of scenes, pick out which ones are the obligatory genre beats, like we're talking about, the secrets or the rituals. And then actually the genre beats are more like when the lovers meet, and then the expected conventions are the secrets and rituals. So just kind of notice where they hit within your structure. And then if one of those is missing, figure out how to incorporate it so that the reader doesn't feel cheated. And then check every scene to ensure your protagonist is driven by their desire and taking action to obtain their end story goal. So just when you have your list of scenes, make sure your protagonist is really being active, making choices, really trying to, get what it is that they want in the end. And then when you're going back through your story, kind of note all the story questions that are brought up, things that people are going to wonder about, and, make sure that they're resolved by the end. And that's going to fulfill the promise that you're making when you make sure those answers are there on the page.
How editors and beta readers can help you.
Yeah, and I was just going to talk about developmental editors. So a lot of the things I was just talking about, like tracking when the story questions are left unanswered, all these things a developmental editor can do for you or with you. And so just they'll note the character emotions, make sure that there's a change in each scene. And then they're going to look for ways to build more tension and conflict. So it can go, hey, how about this? I noticed you brought this up. Let's amp up, how the character is reacting to that. And then again, they can track the story structure and make sure those genre beats are there. And then just really developmental editors can just kind of be your sounding board, someone that you can talk to, about, your ideas for how to make, how to answer all the questions, how to deepen your scenes. And then they can let you know how to rearrange the story structure. So maybe you have everything that you need, but it's just not in the right order, and they can kind of help you see that.
And then beta readers, and you can use beta readers before developmental editing, after developmental editing, or both. But they're extremely helpful in showing you where your story is and isn't meeting reader expectations. And just in case you don't know what a beta reader is, it's someone who it would be your ideal reader. So someone who reads that genre regularly or reads that type of book regularly. And you basically are just asking for their feedback. And yeah, so it's the perfect opportunity for you to get feedback from your ideal reader, which is exactly what you're wanting to know if you want to know whether you're meeting readers' expectations. They'll point out what they liked and didn't like about the story and why. And because they're avid readers of your genre, they will be able to point out like when certain genre conventions seem off, or like, oh, they didn't have their meet cute or whatever in a romance. Or it just wasn't, I didn't think the meet cute was exciting enough or cute enough or whatever. And then you'll also find out if the world you've built or the characters you've created are hard to follow or understand, or whether you're over explaining things. And then you also, the best part is discovering whether your ending is satisfying enough to readers. And that'll really give you a lot of help. And you just take their suggestions. Hopefully you have more than one beta reader. And then if multiple people say the same thing, then you know, okay, maybe this is something I should address. And then copy editors just basically help with awkward sentences, like rewording, revising, finding grammar issues, incorrect punctuation, any repetition, consistency problems. So all of that consistency, like character name spellings, travel times, passage of time, all of that. We are supposed to be able to find all of that and suggest ways to fix. So yeah, copy editing is just very important to the readability of your manuscript. You want it, like I said, you want your manuscript to be easy to read, not necessarily that you don't have like big words in there or anything, just that it's easy to read it and just enjoy yourself instead of having to figure out what you mean or figure out why this word is spelled differently here and then differently over here. That kind of stuff. You want it to be just easy to read. Our next workshop is in May, and we're going to be talking about how you can hook readers with your story. So it's going to be somewhat related to this one, but we're going to give you more ideas. Yeah. Do you have anything to add, Eva, about that?
Yeah, it's just how to, from the beginning, how to get readers to just kind of stick with the story from the beginning and then, of course, all the way through.
Yes, and you can register at either of those links below.